Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Kristen Skelton, and I am the founder of Budfunding, a social enterprise dedicated to sustainable education. Today, I'm excited because I have a special guest with me, and I have Liz Romo with me, and she's the co-founder of the social enterprise Cyclomanias. I've had her here with me before, but we're going to talk about something a little bit different today. So her social enterprise, Cyclomanias, is a pioneer organization rethinking waste and contributing to a circular economy. For over 10 years, it has been able to play an important role in Alberta, Canada, and Mexico, particularly upcycling materials and building a culture of environmental awareness while creating green jobs and engaging with local organizations. Liz, thank you so much for joining me again. How are you doing today?
Very good. Thank you so much for the invitation. Awesome to be back.
So today we're going to talk about a little bit of a different topic. We're going to talk about vermiculture. So what is vermiculture? How do we do vermiculture? What do we need to know about vermiculture? We're going to kind of do a nice little introduction. And of course, if you guys have any questions, definitely put them in the comments. Or if you have any other comments you wanted to share, put them there as well. And hopefully we can address some of the questions, if you have any, that come through. So we'll address them during this session. So let's start off. What is vermiculture and why is it beneficial?
Excellent question and good way to start the conversation about vermiculture. So vermiculture, every time you actually contain small organisms, in this case worms, and you raise them in a controlled environment, like in a box or in a bin, so there is how we call it is culture. So vermi comes from a Latin word that means vermos, worm. So when you're using earthworms, then we call it vermiculture. And vermiculture is the whole technique of raising them, monitoring their temperature, the moisture levels, the food that you're putting in there. So it's a whole microsystem that you are able to control, which is the beauty of having a vermicompost, because you are able to kind of manage your system. And one of the uses or the main benefits is that it's a wonderful source for plant nutrients, especially nitrogen and phosphorus, and improves also the properties of the soil. So the main component of a vermicompost is worm castings, or also worm, which is the worm's poop. But this is a wonderful poop. It's actually called the black gold because it has a lot of rich nutrients, and it's considered an organic fertilizer. And not only is vermicompost rich in nutrients, but it's also loaded with a majestic amount of microorganisms that create and maintain a healthy soil. Actually, I don't know if you know, but 1 tablespoon of topsoil has more organisms than people on Earth. So, of course, we don't see any of them except the worms, and maybe if we look closer with a magnifier, we are able to see some of those cruel animals, some insects, and maybe some larvae. But if we look closer with a microscope, we'll be able to see a majestic microcosmos that is happening there right now while we are talking.
And one thing that I should note, kind of funny, so growing up, and I still kind of am getting over this, but I have like a phobia of earthworms, which is so frustrating because the earth is so important to me, and I garden and all of that kind of stuff. And I don't know where it started, but my brother and his friends always used to like chase me with the earthworms because they knew I was scared of them. And yeah, so it was this whole thing, and I'm trying to move forward with it. But yeah, it's definitely been a random phobia that I've had my whole life, and I'm like working on getting past it because I know they are so good and so important for healthy soil. So I want to know, is vermicompost more beneficial than regular compost, and what's the difference?
Yes, great question as well. And so yes, it is indeed. And compared to regular compost, vermicomposting provides a higher germination rate, and also produces an enriching soil because it improves the biological, as we said, a lot of microorganisms and a lot of animals involved there. And also the chemistry of the whole soil is improved, and also the physical, because as you may not have a good memory with touching the worms, but the soil by itself is so rich, and it gives also that beautiful structure, and the smell is also very gorgeous. So it provides also a lot of structure, chemical, physical, and biological boost to your soils, and therefore improves also the soil nutrition, particularly, as I mentioned initially, nitrogen and phosphorus that are readily available to the roots of the plants to be used. And some studies actually have shown that the soil that has been ingested and digested by the worms and excreted as a worm's poop has 5 times richer in nitrogen that the soil can easily, or the roots of the plants can easily actually take it. So it's a very rich in properties, all sort of properties, and also it has shown that decreases also the heavy metals availability in the soil, the presence in the soil. So reduces also, therefore, the use of chemical fertilizers that we know that are not good at all for the microbiota or the microorganisms that are living there, because when you're using chemical fertilizers, you may get rid of some of the pests or some of the animals or even the plants that you don't like there, as we call it, weeds. I don't think there's such a concept of weeds. It's just an indicator of something going on in your soil. But those chemical fertilizers are actually killing those microorganisms that are so good for us, actually, because at the end of the day, are feeding us, right? We feed our soils. We are feeding very good nutrient plants. So it has also shown that increases the plant growth and the yield. So the farmers are super happy using actually vermicompost compared with regular compost. Also decreases the amount of waste entering the landfills, and reduces greenhouse gas emissions, because, as you know, when organic waste gets decomposed, it releases the greenhouses, which is called methane. And methane actually is 25 times higher impact, global warming impact, than even CO2. So the worms, because they are so hyperactive than some of us, that they just keep moving up and down. And that creates a very aerobic, what we call aerobic system, in where it's just has a lot of oxygen. So when you have a lot of oxygen in between the soil, in between your compost that you're having, it aerates and avoids smells, which usually traditional compost, when you just dump all your organics in one corner and then you abandon that for over the winter and maybe springtime, tends to be very smelly, right? So it's because it becomes very anaerobic, and then it releases also a lot of methane. So improves the soil in general, and what we also call the topsoil, which is the upper layer of our soil, where pretty much all the microbiology is occurring and what allows the way we live, or the life on Earth. So important to have it, and vermicompost definitely has higher benefits and properties than traditional compost.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, that's interesting about the nitrogen as well, because I have a little bean plant in a pot, but some of the leaves were turning yellow, and so I was wondering why that's happening, and they said it's because it's a lack of nitrogen in the soil. So yeah. I'm like, now I need to add some vermicompost to
vermicompost. Yes, yeah. That will be good.
So what type of worms are used for this process?
So that's also a very good question, because in the world of earthworms, or worms per se, there's about 3,000 different kinds of earthworms.
Wow.
So there is a lot of them, right? And some of them we find it also in our garden without even have to purchase any earthworms that are for vermiculture. As we said, the ones that we control in a small box at home. So those that we are actually raising in our vermiculture at home are the three main popular are red wigglers that are usually on sale wherever you find a seller for red wigglers, where for earthworms are actually red wigglers, which are also the ones that I use. There's also another species called, so both are Eisenia, which is the gender of the scientific name, Eisenia fetida, which is the red wigglers, and then we have red tiger, which is also Eisenia, but it's a different species, andrei. And then we have the ones that are a little bit longer and a little bit more purplish, which is called the true redworm, and that is also found usually in the cow dung. So those are the three main earthworms that are used for vermiculture, but there's a huge variety kind of earthworms on nature that have different properties and different capabilities and skills to survive, especially here during the winter. I receive a lot of questions asking me, well, what if some of these vermicompost that I'm putting in the soil also has some of these eggs or these baby worms, earthworms that I have on my vermiculture on my box, and I put it on the garden, they will survive. So some literature says yes, there is they can somehow hibernate there, but they are not good with if you don't keep feeding them with leftovers. They don't feed on not like plants that are there. So that is why there is no such a risk that, oh, if I'm using vermicompost in a planter or in my garden, they will eat my plants. No, that is totally a myth, and that's not true, because they actually eat just some decomposed material. So that is why their probabilities of them surviving outside are very low, unless you are putting it in a compost pile. And actually, I give a few of my friends some red wigglers, so they can put it in their compost, their traditional compost that they have in their garden. So they keep to accelerate also the process of decomposition. And if they keep feeding the system, the probabilities of seeing them next summer are higher than just putting it in the garden with natural plants that are growing there.
And the tiger ones, are they striped? Or what
they are striped as well, yes, and they are very similar than red wigglers. And I would love to have like picture to show you, but yeah, you can just Google red tiger and red wigglers. They look similar because it's the same Eisenia genus, but different species. And then we have the Lumbricus, which actually comes from the Latin word as well, because in Spanish we call earthworms lombrices, so it's Lumbricus, the genus, and then the species is rubellus. So, but there's a lot of common names, so that is why we can get easily lost with all these common names, and each even community call it different. So that is why it's so important to use the scientific names when you're looking for this. And I can share this information as well.
And you kind of mentioned, because my next question was, what do we feed our earthworms and how do we take care of them? And you kind of mentioned that already by the leftovers.
Yes.
So
I can deep on that as well, Christine. So we have the Vermi menu, and actually the main thing here is that you give worms a variety of food. That is why every time I go shopping, I'm also thinking somehow in my worms, because it encourages you to eat healthy, because you want to have a lot of greens, especially leafy stuff. Okay. And the greater the variety, the better the compost, right? Because a lot of food scrap that we are adding actually adds around nutrients, right? And so at the end of the day, we're actually eating those kitchen leftovers. So we don't want to just put fries or food that are junk or fast food, right? So limit the amount also of citrus food, as they are acidic and can affect the pH. In my case, I love citrus fruit, so I add, but with moderation. So just make sure that you actually mix it with also fruits, vegetables, all of these leafy stuff. And coffee grounds, if you're a coffee person, those are delicious, because even the smell, it provides the structure and also the smell. So it's wonderful if you can add also the coffee grounds and filter. And if you have those tea bags that are not with the staple, those will kill your worms. So make sure you remove that staple. But those that are more like in a paper bag, those are wonderful, and that you can add, and those will decompose. Not the ones that are plastified; those are toxic. Should remove it and avoid. And also add a lot of your browns, what we call the carbon source, because you usually have to have a balance between what we call the nitrogen source, which is all your greens, and your carbon source, which is more like the browns, like the dry leaves. You can also add paper. Shredded paper is wonderful. If you add there cardboard, like corrugated cardboard, I have a lot, so add those, shredded that on top of all the fruit and all your nitrogen sources that you are adding, especially also grass clippings as well are good. And one thing that I have read kind of different versions, but I have been doing vermicompost for almost 10 years, and I always add eggshells crushed. So the eggshells are good because earthworms don't have adventition as we have, right? So how they actually manage to triturate and to actually disintegrate pretty much even an avocado seed, right? Like that's just amazed me. So the way they do is that they triturate thanks to these eggshells. So I don't know if you are familiar that, or you know that birds actually ingest also, because they don't have any dentition, ingest also some stones that help them to triturate, to macerate the fruit, and that helped them. The same analogy or the same applies to the worms. The eggshells help them a lot to triturate and to digest the whole thing. So it's also a wonderful source of calcium. So it's good to add those things. Things that you should avoid: meat. So meat and animal products like a poo of your cat, or those you should avoid. Fish as well. Why? Not because they won't decompose that, but it's because your compost is going to be very smelly. It's going to slow down the whole process of decomposition. So you will enjoy more a more vegetarian, I would say, vermicompost than based on meat. So try to avoid all meat, fish, even cheese and butter. Sometimes if there's just small leftover in your plate at the end, it's okay. I have been adding that and it's fine, as long as you compensate very well with your leafy material, with your fruits, with your coffee grounds, and your brown paper as well. And so that's pretty much what I recommend, and ensure that flies and others are not a problem, because you need to cover on top of that. And I think I can talk about that later as well, how to set up the vermicompost. But those is pretty much the things that that worms will enjoy. And
so you said that they'll decompose an avocado pit. So would that be the same for any fruit seed or pit?
They do, yeah. There's incredible. I have seen even the corn. I'm Mexican, as you know. So my worms are also with the Mexican diet. So they actually have been. They love the, how do you call, the corn cob.
Yeah.
So they love being inside and create all these beautiful. Well, I see it, beautiful channels. It's just incredible how they just can get inside, just start eating. But it takes a little bit longer if you add a lot of all these material, but it's just fascinating to see them. Like, of course, the avocado seeds I keep seeing even after 2 months, because it takes a while, and it depends also on the amount of worms that you will have in the system. They prefer easier stuff, like the leafy greens that you're adding, or fruits and vegetables that are also easier. And we have to remember that are not just the worms that are eating of all these kitchen leftovers that we're putting there, right? But it's billions of microorganisms helping also in the decomposition. So all of them are decomposers, what we call, right? So it's just majestic.
That's super cool that they can decompose like all that hard stuff, yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so let's talk about how to set up the vermicompost properly.
Yeah, so for those that are like hesitant, I'm not sure if this is something that I should do. Actually, the first 6 years that I have a vermicompost, I was living in a very small apartment, and my vermicompost was always by my side in the kitchen. So the secret here is, if you I mean monitoring at least once a week, you're fine. It should not generate it should not have any fruit flies problem, which is the most common problems with vermicompost. Are the two main inconveniences that people may think, oh no, I don't want to be dealing with all these things, right? So the easiest way to use is just to have an opaque or dark container bin. It can be made of wood or plastic. Usually those plastics that you get in the store with a lid, you just put with a drill bit some small holes on top, so to allow the ventilation. That should be enough. And they recommend that for 3 kilograms of kitchen scraps or leftovers that you put per week, a box 4x2 foot should be enough. So that means I more into centimeters. So it's 30 centimeters and then 60 centimeters and then 90 centimeters in depth. So you don't want so deep because you want the worms to go from the bottom to the top. But once it reaches the top, you have an 1 foot square area, enough for them to decompose the first layer, because it's more like a lasagna, you know. So you start with a bedding. So the bedding, what we call bedding, is integrated by shredded paper, pieces of cardboard, corrugated cardboard that you add there. Then you add also your leafy dry leaf as well. And you can also add peat moss. And so that's more like literally the bed. You're preparing the bed for the worms. And then you put, so once you have the container, of course, you just prepare the bedding. And you put the worms, your earthworms, the red wigglers or red tiger, or whatever earthworms for vermiculture you have. Usually people start with a pound, 250 grams. So then you distribute that and add the worms and cover them with soil. So it's very important. And I have a question. One of my customers yesterday actually asking me, well, I have been putting soil from my garden. Is that, but I see that a bunch of animals are there, even centipedes. And I was like, oh no, centipedes are gonna be eating your worms. So the recommendation is that you should add soil, just those cheap soil that are maybe not so rich in nutrients, but just clean, because we want to have not an sterilized or pasteurized soil, but just a common soil that is not from the garden, because the garden will add up more microorganisms to your system that already has, right? So we just want to cover, and the way, and we want to cover at least 1 inch. And then on top of that, then you put all your browns, which we talk about, the carbon sources, which are, Christine, what are your carbon sources for your vermicompost?
Oh my gosh, I'm blanking here. Sorry.
Not a problem.
I have like 5 questions in my head that I'm also remembering.
Not a problem. So the shredded paper is one thing. So you put all your browns.
I was going to say that, but I was like, no, we have that on the bottom.
As well, but you do lasagna. So you keep repeating the same thing. So then you add your dry leaves, you add your shredded paper, and then you cover with the soil and then with their food. So then your kitchen scraps should be there. So it's just kind of repeating the same layer one after another. You don't have to touch the worms. The worms will do their traveling, aerating up and down, and they actually tend to go to the fresh food. So that when I was saying you need to keep monitoring, is that if you still see a lot of kitchen leftovers there that have not been decomposed completely, you should wait a little bit before you put new things, just to make sure that the worms eat what you already put there in the first layer, and then after that you put the next. So of course it has not to be decomposed completely, but at least there's some activity going on. You see a little bit of the worm just curling in some of the banana. So it's a little bit of interaction happening with the food that you already put there. Then it's a good indicator that you should put the next layer of food. And the important here as well, that every time you're putting food scraps or kitchen leftovers, that you make you cut it in smaller pieces, because as we talked, they don't have dentition, right? So that will accelerate also the process. You're helping them with the mechanical first process in digestion that we actually have it with our beautiful dentition, help us to accelerate that process before it ends up in our stomach. So in the case of the worms, they need somehow smaller pieces that can help accelerate also that process, and they can ingest it easily, right? And take it into their digestive system. So feed your worms every 1 or 2 weeks, depending on how fast they're eating. And then use a spray bottle to water on top of the compost bed. That's important, especially if you are putting your vermicompost outside, especially during these sunny days. So it's good to just make sure that it's humid, because worms actually takes the oxygen from the water. So their whole bodies, that is why they're sticky, and so they breathe through their whole body. It's not that they have a nose like ourselves. So so make sure that their medium, their environment, their vermiculture is actually humid, not with a lot of water, because they are not good swimmers, but just make sure that it's moist enough that you don't need to add And I have here, but I don't know if you will be able to see that moist. But yeah, make sure that whenever you have it, just like you are able to, so it's not leaking water, but at the same time you are able to treat it like a clay, you know, like more like a clay. So that's a good level of moisture, yes. And every time you feed your worms, repeat the layer again. Then you put, so first you're bedding your worms, then your soil, then your carbon. And I have also a lot of these diagrams and illustrations online, and there is also a lot of information online as well with your lasagna. So you pack all this and you cover with soil. It's important that you put your soil, because the fruit flies are good flying, but are not good crawling. So if you make sure that you have at least 1 inch of soil, they won't go out, in case that you have also fruit flies. The other thing is that before you even put any fruit peel, like banana peels, where usually all these little eggs of the fruit flies laid and we are not able to see it, you actually put it in the fridge just 1 day before you put it into the vermicompost. So that will kill their eggs.
Okay. And how do we know when we can take out some soil for the garden?
Yeah. Well, what I like, if you're just using that box, once it's full, completely full of your food with all your lasagna layers of soil and soil and food, so you leave it for about, I sometimes leave it for more than a month, but usually they recommend 90 days. So it's completely decomposed. So you don't have to put anything else. So you need to keep monitoring just to see until it gets completely all pretty much black, nice earthy smell as well. So you leave it for, I will say a month after it's full, because it has been already almost a month working there. So it's about two months. So it depends what kind of food as well. If you're putting a lot of these avocado seeds, it will take a little bit longer than that. So as soon as you see that the whole bean pretty much is all black and nice earthy smell, that's a good indicator that now you need to actually harvest the worms. And by harvest the worms, I mean separate the worms and baby worms back to your vermiculture, to another bin, to start again the system, and use your delicious, actually I have some of this black gold. So your soil, which is it's just beautiful because it's very granular, and then you can actually just put it on top of your plants, or we will talk about how you can use this thing. But yeah, that's something that you need to separate, and there are different methods. I have also a YouTube channel that I explain one of the most common methods, because worms, they don't like light. So you just do these piles and you wait just a few minutes so the worm just migrate to the bottom, and then after that you just remove the top or the tips of these little pyramids that you are putting. You can work outside in the garden. Right now it's a nice weather, but when you have your worms in the basement during the winter time, you need just a very potent, nice light that put the worms away, and they will just migrate for the bottom, and then you just do that process, separate the top. And those tops are actually the castings, and then you just have your worms. You may need just a sieve or something at the end, just to keep it, to make sure that it's very granular and ready to use in your garden or in your indoors planters.
Okay, so I want to know, do we have to worry about our worms escaping?
Good question. So not if you're monitoring, as I said, your bean regularly. So usually when they are escaping, it's an indicator as well that maybe you have too much water there, or you haven't fed them. I remember one occasion that one of my customers, they actually left without a lid the bean, the small box, because they just bought some worms in their box. They remove the lid and they leave it in the washroom with they turn off the lights. So of course the next day, because they were in the washroom, it was humid, I guess, they would prefer to go out and they were looking for food. And if you leave it without the lid, that is where the lid is so important that you keep it there. And they haven't put any food. The worms already were, I think, very hungry. So they tend to, of course, it's dark. They are happy. It's like their environment underground. So they feel familiar. They can just go out. So just try to think like a worm, right? If you are not feeding them, if you're putting too much water, I will just cave off this system, right, of this box. So if you avoid all these things, that'll be good. If you have a lot of centipedes there, of course they will just run away as well. So yeah, just try to avoid those things. And the more you just get used to, okay, it's part of my routine every week, I just feed the system, make sure that I cut it, everything, I put it there, and I just keep monitoring, right? If they are there, it's alive, because I may just keep putting food, and then what if they are not even alive, right? So you need to just be familiar with the whole thing. And if you are a little bit hesitant of touching the worms, you can always wear gloves, right?
Okay, good to know. So what are some ways that we can use the vermicast or the earthworm poop?
Yeah, so there are three main things that you can do with the vermicast once you have them separate, and you have be able to separate the worms. So it can be just direct use. Sprinkle a teaspoon of the vermicompost near the roots of the plants. Or if now that we are on the planting vegetables, if you have a plot or a bed in your garden. So what we usually also use is you have your vermicast, you have just a teaspoon. So before you transplant your broccoli plant or any of the veggies that you want to put in your bed, so you just sprinkle a little bit on the bottom, and then you just cover with your soil and the plant. So that's also a direct use of the vermicompost. The other thing is you can mix it with your soil. So it's just to give a boost of all these if you buy these soils in the store that don't have, like the potting soil, but there are also cheaper versions that is just pretty much soil and don't have so much nutrients, but then you give them a boost with this vermicompost. And what they recommend is that you mix a ratio 1:4, which is one, if you're putting 1 cup of castings, you put 4 of the potting soil or the soil that you have. So you mix all this, and it's a very nutritious compost that you just add on top of your bed, or again when you're just transplanting, you put it on the bottom. The other thing that you also can do is a vermicompost tea as well. So it's when you mix it with the water, and you just leave it for 24 hours. So literally you can have a bag with all these castings inside, and you just leave it in there. Can be 1 liter depending of so if you have 1 tablespoon of your vermicompost, mix it with 1 liter of water, and it depends also what plant you are growing, or for one plant you want it. If you want a little bit more concentrated, then you add 2 tablespoons. So you need to check what kind of for what kind of plants, and then use a spray bottle and sprinkle near the roots of the plant or in the leaves as well. So they absorb all these nutrients from both sides.
Okay, cool. So if someone wants to get started with this whole system, how because I know you sell some vermicompost kits, so how do we get started?
Yeah, well, actually, for those that are not so sure, like I have actually the vermikit, and the vermikit includes worms just to start your system, and also starts the bedding. So the bedding, as I mentioned, just a few ingredients that will boost and will kind of create that nice bedding for your system. And if you have just the container, you just need to have a container, and then you just put the worms in there. And I also include a little bit of the soil, the bedding, and the worms, and a manual, because it's always so important to have a handy vermikit manual, which includes a little bit of the setup, maintenance, some tips based on my experience over the last 10 years and from the customers, and all these questions that actually makes you to learn more, actually. And it's just fascinating to hear about all of them, because I have a customer that also asked me, well, I just have a blueberry. I know that what is the pH of your castings. And I said, well, castings are actually neutral. And usually plants or shrubs that you grow here, particularly in Alberta, are acidic. So in this case, vermicompost is wonderful, but you need to add a little bit, acidify the medium. And in that case, it's recommended that you add pine needles or vinegar. So that will just make a little bit more acidic your compost, and then you can put it on top of your on the bottom of the plant. So we have also the Vermi menu included as well, what to add, what not to add, and we have also a bunch of activities, fun facts, and we have a bunch of resources online as well, and the YouTube channel where you can find more information about this.
That's awesome. So what are the channels that people can connect with you and find out more?
Yeah, so we have an online shop, and we are very active also in social media. So you can find us as Cyclomanias at Facebook and also at Instagram. And we have our online shop as well. And we have free shipping in Calgary, and we're almost 24/7 available for customer service and to solve any question and to learn together. And so we are excited actually to hear the journey of the vermicomposting with all our followers and our people that are so keen to learn more about vermiculture and grow this, because now it's the right time to regenerate our soils, and it's so much needed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see a comment that came through. It said, I love the idea that vermiculture doesn't smell, whereas regular compost can.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, it can actually. And it's just thanks to the worms, because they keep aerating the whole system. And I know that there are other systems, even bokashi. I don't know if you're familiar. Bokashi is if you just put it's a fungi. So you add it, and you can add even meat, but that's very smelly if you just even open it. I used to have that as well in the balcony, but yeah, the smell is just not so good.
Yeah. That's awesome. Liz, thank you so much for sharing all your wonderful knowledge about vermiculture. And if anyone has any questions, definitely put them in the comments, and either of us can respond later. And if you're watching the replay, give us a #replay. And I hope everyone has an excellent Wednesday, and I will see you soon. Thanks so much again to everyone for being with us.
Lovely. Take care. Enjoy the worms and the sunshine.